January wind cut through Copper Bend Courthouse like a promise kept by something cruel. Ruth Mackler stood in the back row, 62 years old, and every one of them written on her hands. The auctioneer's gavel cracked against frozen oak. Mackler Homestead, 160 acres as is. Do I hear $1? Silence. Families clustered for warmth, breath clouding. Nobody fool enough to bid on a corpse of a farm. Ruth raised her hand. Laughter rolled through the room, sharp, cutting, the sound of a town that had buried too many hopes to waste pity on one more. Sold to the widow for $1 American. The county clerk slid the deed across his desk. Fountain pen scratched 3 words in the margin. Subject to conditions. His smile was apologetic, almost kind. Ruth signed. The pen was cold, but the clerk's signature below hers, already dry. Outside, she unfolded the paper. The conditional clause read, 120-day continuous occupation required, or title reverts May 1st, 1934. She'd just bought 4 months to prove herself. Or 4 months to fail. The Mackler place looked like God had given up on it, halfway through creation. Ruth stopped her borrowed truck at the top of the drive, ruts deep enough to swallow a wheel, and sat with the engine ticking down to silence. The barn leaned 20 degrees east. Roof shingles scattered across frozen ground like cards thrown in disgust. The stone farmhouse still stood, but the porch sagged under snow weight and every window showed dark. She'd worked 40 years on other people's land, knew how to read a place by its bones. The stone walls were sound, 18 inches thick, built by someone who understood Montana. Winters meant survival, not comfort. Ruth climbed out. Wind hit her face, carrying the smell of pine and something else. Decay, maybe, or just honest rot. Boot leather creaked in the cold. Her breath clouded. The well pump stood 20 yards from the house, iron handle frozen vertical. She'd need to thaw that tonight, or there'd be no water come morning. The root cellar caught her attention. Iron door set into the hillside, the kind built to survive tornadoes and bank failures alike. She crossed to it, boots crunching through ice crust. Pulled the handle. The door opened on hinges that needed oil, but held firm, darkness below. She'd need her kerosene lamp. But before she turned back to the truck, she noticed fresh boot prints in the cellar entrance. Large, man-sized, recent enough that snow hadn't filled them yet. Ruth stood very still, listening. Wind through barn slats, a magpie calling from the tree line. Nothing else. She walked to the farmhouse, pushed open the front door, unlocked, hanging loose on leather hinges. One main room, wood stove cold in the corner, table, 2 chairs, narrow cot against the far wall, dust thick enough to write your name in. Someone had. A single word traced in the table's dust. Leave. Ruth pulled off her glove. Wrote beneath it, no. That's when she heard it. A brass bell, ringing clear and bright from the root cellar, like a church calling sinners to account. Ruth lit the kerosene lamp and descended stone steps into the cellar. The bell sound had stopped, but now she knew what caused it. A brass surveying instrument, theodolite, hanging from a nail on the support beam. The cellar door's motion had set it swinging. The flame threw shadows across walls, 12 feet by 12. Shelves built into stone, mostly empty except for 3 mason jars of something that might have been preserves a decade back. And in the corner, wrapped in oilcloth, the theodolite, a leather satchel, and rolled papers. Ruth set the lamp down, unwrapped the instrument carefully. Beautiful piece of work, brass fittings, leveling screws, telescope sight, the kind surveyors used for property boundaries and railroad grades, worth $200 new, maybe more. She turned it over. The nameplate was engraved E. Talmadge, County Surveyor, 1928, Ezra Talmadge. Everyone in Copper Bend knew him. The old surveyor had quit county work years back, moved up to a cabin on Bitterroot Ridge, kept to himself, drank more than he should, never talked about why he'd left a job he'd held 30 years. So what was his theodolite doing buried in her root cellar? Ruth opened the leather satchel. Inside, hand-drawn property maps, survey notes, mineral composition charts, and underneath, a single page of notepaper with 2 words written in shaky pencil, "Forgive me." She was about to unfold the maps when the smell hit her, sharp, acrid, sulfur, coming from the far corner where stone foundation met packed earth. Ruth moved the lamp closer. The earth there was stained dark, almost orange. She touched it, brought her fingers to her nose. Mineral oxidation, the kind that happened when certain metals met air and moisture over time. Her grandfather had worked copper mines in Butte. She'd seen this before. But copper was common enough in Montana. Nothing worth stealing theodolites over. She gathered the instrument, the satchel, the maps. Climbed back into cold twilight. The sun was setting behind the western ridge, painting snow gold and purple. The farm stretched before her, 160 acres bought for $1 with a barn that would collapse by spring and a house that barely kept out wind. But underneath, something else, something someone had hidden. Ruth looked at the deed in her coat pocket, then back at the theodolite in her hands. The math wasn't adding up, but by God's mercy she'd have 4 months to make it balance. Let me add transition/sensory detail to hit target. She walked back to the farmhouse as darkness came on full. Inside, she coaxed the wood stove to life with kindling and a match. The metal ticked as it warmed. Smell of pine smoke filled the room. Ruth spread the survey maps on the table. Her kerosene lamp cast yellow light across hand-drawn property lines and elevation markers. Ezra's handwriting was precise, methodical. 7 brass survey stakes marked on the property, running northeast in a line. Outside, snow began to fall, soft at first, then heavier. She touched the theodolite's brass bell. It rang once, clear and true. Tomorrow she'd find those survey stakes. Tonight she'd sleep in a house that was hers, conditional or not, for the first time in 62 years. The deed lay on the table beside the maps. 120-day continuous occupation, 119 days left. Ruth banked the fire and lay down on the narrow cot. The house creaked around her, wind found gaps in the walls, but the stone held firm, and the roof, for now, kept out the weather. She closed her eyes, slept, and dreamed of brass bells ringing in darkness, calling something awake. Drummond's Mercantile smelled like every general store Ruth had ever entered. Pickles, leather, fresh-cut lumber stacked near the pot-belly stove. Nell Drummond stood behind the counter, gray hair pulled tight, apron spotless despite the flour dust covering everything else. 3 women clustered near the fabric bolts, church ladies, by the look of them. Their conversation stopped when Ruth entered. Bell above the door announced her like an alarm. "Morning, Nell." Ruth set her list on the counter. Lamp oil, flour, salt pork, canned goods to get through February. "Need to open a line of credit." Nell picked up the list without looking at it. "Can't do that, Ruth. I'll settle up come spring. I'm good for it." "I'm sure you would be." Nell's voice was kind, which made it worse. "But I got a note from the bank. It says credit's not available for the Mackler property. Not till your ownership situation's clarified." The church ladies were listening now, not even pretending otherwise. Ruth kept her voice level. "My ownership's clear. I've got the deed. Conditional deed, I heard." Nell folded the list, handed it back. The paper crackled in the cold. "Look, honey, I don't make the rules. Bank says no credit. I can't extend it. You understand?" "I understand you're following Clayton Voss's orders." One of the church ladies gasped. Actually gasped, like Ruth had cursed in Sunday service. Nell's expression hardened. "Mr. Voss holds my mortgage, same as he holds half the mortgages in this town. I got 4 children and a business to protect. You bought that farm knowing the conditions. That's not my burden to carry." Ruth picked up her list. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Shame had burned through to something colder. 6 farms foreclosed in 4 years, Nell. All of them sold for $1. All of them with those same conditions. You ever wonder why? I wonder why a 62-year-old widow thinks she can work 160 acres alone through winter. The stove popped. Someone coughed. "The bank knows things about that farm you don't, honey." Nell's voice dropped. "Be smart and leave while you still can." Ruth walked out, bell jingling above the door, and nearly collided with Clayton Voss on the boardwalk, almost like he'd been waiting. Clayton Voss wore the kind of suit that made Montana winters look optional. Wool so fine it probably cost more than Ruth's truck. 50 years old, silver at the temples. The smile of a man who'd never missed a mortgage payment because he was the one collecting them. "Mrs. Mackler, I hoped I'd run into you. Did you?" Ruth stepped around him. He matched her pace, boots clicking on frozen boardwalk. "I wanted to extend a courtesy, given your, situation." "My situation's fine." "Is it?" He gestured back toward the Mercantile. "No credit, no cash reserves. Winter barely started. That farm's been vacant 2 years, Mrs. Mackler. The barn's unsalvageable. The well pump's likely cracked. You're looking at $500 in repairs minimum, and that's if nothing else breaks. Then I'll fix what I can and live without the rest." Voss stopped walking. So did Ruth. "I'm trying to help you." His voice was reasonable, almost kind. "I'll give you $500 cash for that deed, today. You can walk away with money in your pocket instead of pride in your grave." "Why? Excuse me?" Why do you want 160 acres of broken-down homestead badly enough to offer $500 for a $1 purchase? Voss's smile thinned. I'm a banker, Mrs. Mackler. I see investment opportunities others miss. That land has potential. Potential. Ruth turned the word over like a coin. Nell said the bank knows things about my farm I don't. What things, Mr. Voss? I don't speak for Nell. But you hold her mortgage. She speaks for you, seems like. A wagon rolled past, driver tipping his hat to Voss, ignoring Ruth entirely. Voss waited until it passed. You're a stubborn woman. I respect that. But stubbornness doesn't pay property taxes or survive Montana winters. The conditional clause on your deed isn't arbitrary. It's designed to protect the county from owners who can't maintain their obligations. You have until May 1st to prove continuous occupation and pay $240 in back taxes. If you fail either requirement, ownership reverts. Reverts to you, to the county, which will, of course, put it up for auction again. He buttoned his coat. Cashmere, probably. And I'll be the only bidder, because everyone else in Copper Bend knows what I'm telling you now. That farm isn't worth fighting for. Ruth felt the theodolite's weight in her mind. Brass instrument hidden in a cellar, Ezra Talmadge's name engraved, sulfur smell in the earth. What about the tungsten? She said quietly. Voss went very still. Tungsten deposits, Ruth continued, watching his face. Those revert with the deed too, I'm guessing? For just a second, less than a heartbeat, Voss's mask slipped. She saw calculation behind it, and something sharper, fear that she knew more than she should. Then he smiled again. I have no idea what you're talking about, Mrs. Mackler, but I'd be careful about spreading rumors regarding mineral rights. Slander can be expensive. He walked away, boot heels sharp on frozen boardwalk. Ruth stood there as the words settled in her chest like a stone. Tungsten. She hadn't known what mineral made that sulfur smell, but Voss had just told her, and told her he'd known before the foreclosure, before the auction, before he let her buy the farm for $1, knowing he'd take it back in 4 months, deposits and all. Ezra Talmadge's cabin clung to Bitterroot Ridge like a climber losing his grip. Ruth found it just before full dark, smoke rising from the chimney, single lamp burning in the window. She knocked, waited, knocked again. The door opened. Ezra stood there in suspenders and flannel, 68 years old, beard gone mostly white, eyes bloodshot from drink or wind or both. Mrs. Mackler. He didn't sound surprised. Found your theodolite. Ruth's breath clouded in the cold. Thought you might want it back. Long silence. Then Ezra stepped aside. Come in before we both freeze. The cabin was one room. Bed, stove, table, chair. Surveying maps covered the walls. Yellowed with age, corners curling. A whiskey bottle sat on the table, half empty. Ruth set the theodolite down. Brass gleamed in lamplight. Ezra stared at it like it was a ghost. Where? His voice was rough. Root cellar, Mackler property, wrapped in oilcloth with your survey notes from 1929. Ezra poured whiskey into a tin cup. Didn't offer her any. That farm's cursed. It's not cursed, it's stolen. Same thing, different words. Ruth pulled out the chair, sat without invitation. The wood creaked. Clayton Voss came to see me today. Offered $500 for my deed. Then he mentioned tungsten deposits. Seemed real interested in making sure those reverted to the county come May. Ezra drank. Didn't respond. I'm guessing, Ruth continued, that you surveyed that property in 1929, found something worth hiding, and Voss took your theodolite so you couldn't prove what you'd measured. You're guessing a lot. Then tell me I'm wrong. Ezra turned the cup in his hands. Outside, wind rattled the cabin walls, pine branches scraping against roof shingles, finally. I surveyed 6 properties that winter. County hired me to update mineral rights documentation after the '28 mining boom in Wyoming. Routine work. He looked at her. Except the readings weren't routine. Ruth waited. Tungsten concentrations I'd never seen outside an active mine, running in a vein through all 6 homesteads. Mackler, Patterson, Gray, 2 others. Maybe $11 million worth. Conservative estimate. Ruth's breath caught. $11 million. I filed my report with the county, Ezra went on. 3 days later, Voss came to my office. Said the findings were economically sensitive. Said the county needed time to determine proper assessment procedures. Asked to borrow my theodolite and survey notes for verification. And you gave them to him. I was 42 years old, with a wife and two daughters. Voss held my house mortgage. Ezra's hands tightened on the cup, metal dented slightly. He promised he'd return the equipment in a month. Month turned into 6 months. By then, the first farm had foreclosed. Mackler's place. Sold to the bank for $1. I went to Voss, demanded my theodolite back. He said he'd lost it, said if I made trouble, he'd make sure my survey license got revoked for faulty documentation. So you quit. So I became a coward. Ezra drank again. Watched 5 more families lose their farms over the next 3 years. All of them foreclosed under suspicious circumstances. All of them sold for $1 with conditional deeds. And I kept my mouth shut because I had a mortgage and daughters who needed to eat. Ruth looked at the maps on the walls. Decades of work, measurements, boundary lines. Your wife? Dead. 6 years now. Daughters moved to Oregon. He laughed, bitter. Kept my house. Lost everything else worth keeping. The stove popped. Smell of whiskey and old wool filled the room. Ruth stood. That instrument could prove Voss resurveyed those properties illegally. Could prove he knew about the tungsten before the foreclosures. Could prove it to who? Ezra met her eyes. The county clerk's his cousin. The sheriff owes him $20,000. The judge plays poker at his house every Thursday. He touched the theodolite, fingers gentle. The man who'd testify against Clayton Voss is already dead, Mrs. Mackler. Unless you count a coward who drinks himself to sleep every night. Ruth picked up the theodolite, brass cold against her palms. Then I'll find someone who's not dead, but I'm keeping this. If you want it back, you'll have to earn it. She walked to the door, stopped. 40 years. I worked other people's land, Ezra. Never owned a damn thing. That farm's mine. Conditional or not, and I'm not giving it up because a banker decided to steal what wasn't his. Outside, snow had started falling. Soft at first, then heavier. Dawn came cold and clear. Ruth carried the theodolite to the eastern ridge, leather satchel slung over her shoulder, breath clouding. She'd watched surveyors work 100 times, railroad men, county assessors, mining company scouts, knew the basics, set up the tripod level, sight through the telescope, measure angles and distances, mark reference points. Her grandfather's voice in her head. Competence is just stubbornness with a plan, girl. The tripod legs sank into frozen ground. She adjusted the leveling screws. Checked the spirit bubble, peered through the telescope. Crosshairs steadied on the barn's south corner. Good. Now rotate. Measure the azimuth, record the angle. She worked for 2 hours, mapping the property boundaries according to Ezra's 1929 survey notes. The math was simple enough if you paid attention. Triangulation, base angles, distance calculations, and that's when she found them. Brass survey stakes, buried under 6 inches of snow and frozen dirt, but still there. Ezra had marked the vein's path with precision. 7 stakes running northeast across her land. Ruth unearthed each one carefully, checked the coordinates against Ezra's notes. Perfect match. First stake, property's southwest corner. Second, 200 yards northeast near the collapsed barn. Third, 400 yards further at the tree line. Fourth, just inside the eastern boundary. Fifth, Ruth stopped digging. The 5th stake was marked externe vein, exterior vein, the point where the tungsten deposit exited her property. But according to her deed, the eastern boundary was 50 yards west of this stake, which meant the vein extended onto land she didn't own. She pulled out her property map, spread it on the snow. The adjacent parcel had been the Gray homestead, foreclosed in 1931, sold to Voss for $1, and beyond that, the Patterson place, also foreclosed. Ruth stood slowly, theodolite forgotten, understanding crystallizing like ice. Voss hadn't just stolen 6 farms, he'd engineered a mineral consolidation. Every foreclosed property shared the same tungsten vein. Individually, worthless, deposits too small to mine profitably, but together, contiguous, one owner controlling access, $11 million. She looked at the stake marked XT vein, then back at her farmhouse a quarter-mile away. Voss didn't need to fight her for 160 acres. He just needed her to fail the conditional clause. Come May 1st, he'd have the final piece of his mineral empire, and no one would even remember the 6 families he'd destroyed to build it. Ruth sat on frozen ground beside the 5th stake. Her hands were numb, not from cold, from the weight of what she'd just understood. She pulled out Ezra's survey notes, traced the vein's path with her finger. It entered her property at the southwest corner, ran northeast through the barn, through the tree line, exited at the eastern boundary, then continued through Gray's old place, through Patterson's, through 4 more foreclosed homesteads, 6 properties, 6 families, 1 continuous tungsten deposit. The notes included mineral composition charts, Ezra's handwriting precise, tungsten concentration, 2.3% per ton, estimated depth, 40 to 60 feet, extraction feasibility, high, market value, 1929, 8 to 11, $11 million in 1929 money, worth even more now with the war building in Europe, tungsten for steel alloys, for armor plating, for machine tools. Ruth folded the map, tucked it back in the satchel. The sun was climbing, warming nothing, just making the cold more visible. She gathered the theodolite, walked back to the farmhouse. Her boots broke through ice crust with each step. The sound was sharp, final. Inside, she spread all the evidence on her table. The survey stakes coordinates, the mineral charts, the property deeds she'd copied from county records, 6 farms, 6 conditional clauses, 6 families who'd tried to survive winter and failed, and Voss had been there at every foreclosure, the only bidder, taking each piece for $1, building his empire one desperate family at a time. Ruth touched the worn deed in her coat pocket. 117 days left. She looked at the theodolite. Its brass bell caught lamplight. Tomorrow she'd go back to Ezra's cabin, show him what she'd found, make him understand that silence was the same as complicity. Tonight, she'd calculate exactly how much evidence she needed to prove conspiracy, to prove fraud, to prove that Clayton Voss had stolen 6 farms and $11 million, while the law looked the other way. The wind picked up outside, snow beginning to fall again. Ruth banked the fire, made coffee on the wood stove, bitter and strong. She had 4 months to document a crime that had taken 5 years to execute, 4 months to become something she'd never been, someone who fought back. The Copper Bend Community Church smelled like coffee and judgment. Ruth arrived at the Sunday social with Ezra's survey notes in her coat pocket and a jar of preserves she'd found in the cellar. Her contribution to the potluck table, though she suspected no one would eat it. She'd been right. The preserves sat untouched among the casseroles and pies while women clustered at the far end of the parish hall, voices dropping when Ruth approached. "Afternoon, ladies." Ruth poured herself coffee from the percolator. The metal was hot against her palm. Sarah Mitchell smiled, tight and false. "Ruth, surprised to see you here." "Why wouldn't I be?" "Oh, no reason. Just thought you'd be busy with your project out at the farm." 3 other women had stopped talking entirely, watching the exchange like it was a stage play. Nell Drummond materialized at Sarah's elbow. "We heard you've been surveying your property, digging up markers, taking measurements." "I'm documenting what I own." Nell's expression was all sympathy and steel. "Honey, I'm going to say this because I care. People are worried about you. Talking about conspiracy theories, harassing Mr. Voss on the street, accusing upstanding businessmen of fraud." "I never said fraud." "You implied it, loudly, in front of half the town." Nell touched Ruth's arm, the gesture theatrical enough that everyone nearby could see it. "Loss does things to a person's mind. Your husband's passing, that was, 5 years ago? Sometimes grief makes us see patterns that aren't there, makes us lash out at people trying to help." Ruth set down her coffee cup, very carefully. China clicked against saucer. "You think I'm crazy." "I think you're unwell. I think winter isolation in a broken-down farmhouse is dangerous for a woman your age. I think—" "You think," Ruth interrupted, voice carrying now, "that if you paint me as a lunatic, no one will listen when I prove Clayton Voss stole 6 farms through mineral rights fraud." The room went silent. Even the children stopped running. Nell's face flushed. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a documented fact. I have survey notes, mineral assessments, and property records showing a tungsten vein worth $11 million running through every foreclosed homestead in this county. Voss knew about it before the foreclosures. He engineered the conditional deeds to consolidate ownership." Sarah Mitchell gasped. Someone else whispered, "Lord have mercy." "And I can prove it," Ruth finished, "with a theodolite that belongs to Ezra Talmadge, the same theodolite Voss stole in 1929 to hide his illegal surveys." The parish hall door opened. Clayton Voss walked in, Pastor Whitfield beside him, both men smiling. Pastor Whitfield raised his hands for quiet. "Friends, before we continue our fellowship, I have wonderful news. Mr. Voss has generously donated $2,000 to our roof repair fund. Thanks to his Christian charity, we'll have a sound building before spring rains come. Applause, genuine, enthusiastic. Voss nodded humbly. Just doing what I can for our community. Ruth stayed perfectly still, coffee cup cooling in her hand. The pastor continued. Now, Mr. Voss has also asked to address a concern that's come to our attention. Clayton? Voss stepped forward, expression solemn. Thank you, Pastor. I'll be brief because this is a delicate matter. He looked around the room, meeting eyes, building connection. Many of you know Mrs. Ruth Mackler recently purchased the old Mackler homestead. What you may not know is that I've been working with county authorities to ensure her safety and well-being during this difficult transition. Ruth's jaw tightened. Mrs. Mackler has made some troubling statements recently, Voss continued. Accusations without foundation, paranoid theories about bank conspiracies and stolen property. As her banker and a concerned neighbor, I felt obligated to consult with a medical professional. He pulled an envelope from his coat. Expensive paper, the kind that came from Billings. Dr. Lawrence Kemp, a respected psychiatrist, has reviewed Mrs. Mackler's behavior pattern and provided this assessment. He handed the letter to Pastor Whitfield. The pastor read aloud. Based on reported symptoms, paranoid ideation, aggressive confrontations, social isolation, and delusional thinking regarding property rights, I recommend immediate psychiatric evaluation to determine if Mrs. Mackler poses a danger to herself or others. Her insistence on remaining alone in an uninhabitable dwelling during winter months suggests impaired judgment consistent with senile dementia or acute grief-induced psychosis. The room held its breath. Ruth's voice cut through it, low and hard. Kemp's your brother-in-law. Voss didn't flinch. Dr. Kemp is a licensed professional whose family connection doesn't diminish his medical expertise. If anything, it shows how seriously I take this situation. I'm asking family for help. You're manufacturing evidence to invalidate my deed. I'm trying to prevent a tragedy. Voss turned to the crowd. Winter isolation kills people in this county every year. Exposure, accidents, starvation, Mrs. Mackler is 62 years old, widowed, living without electricity or running water in a structure that should be condemned. If she injures herself, or worse, out there alone, we'll all bear responsibility for not intervening. Nell Drummond stepped forward. He's right, Ruth. This isn't about the farm. It's about keeping you safe. Safe? Ruth tasted the word like poison. Safe means I leave. Safe means Voss gets my property. She pulled the psychiatrist's letter from the pastor's hands. Read it quickly. Her eyes caught on the signature. Dr. Lawrence Kemp, M.D., and below that, in smaller print, Notary Public, Lemhi County, the same notary who'd signed all 6 conditional deed clauses. Ruth looked up. This letter also mentions the tax sale date has been moved to April 28th. That's 3 days before my conditional clause expires. Interesting timing, Mr. Voss. Voss's expression didn't change. The county clerk accelerated the sale to accommodate assessment schedules. It's a routine administrative adjustment. The county clerk is your cousin. The county clerk follows legal procedures. Ruth looked around the room, at faces she'd known for 40 years, worked beside, buried loved ones with, saw them watching her with pity, with suspicion, with the particular cruelty of people who believe they're being kind. Sarah Mitchell spoke softly. Ruth, honey, maybe you should consider getting some rest. Somewhere warm, somewhere with people who can look after you. I don't need looking after. I need witnesses who will testify about mineral rights fraud. See? Voss said quietly. Still fixated on conspiracy theories. Pastor, I think this demonstrates exactly what Dr. Kemp was concerned about. Ruth folded the letter, tucked it in her coat pocket beside her deed. When I prove what you've done, Clayton, and I will prove it, every person in this room who stayed silent will have to live with what they chose. She looked at Nell. Comfort won't taste as sweet when you know what it cost. Outside, snow had started falling. Ruth walked to her truck, hands shaking now, vision blurred. She sat in the cab, read the psychiatrist's letter again. Dr. Lawrence Kemp, Voss's brother-in-law, the same Kemp who'd notarized all 6 conditional deeds. The trap was tightening. April 28th, 43 days left instead of 46. And if Voss succeeded in getting her declared mentally incompetent, the deed would be invalidated regardless. Turned over to the county for proper administration. meaning straight into his vault. Ruth started the engine, let it warm. She had 43 days, no allies except a guilt-ridden surveyor who drank himself to sleep, a town that thought she was crazy, and a banker who controlled every lever of power in Copper Bend. But she had something Voss didn't know about. She had his mistake, the letter in her pocket, the signature at the bottom, L. Kemp, Notary Public. The same man who'd notarized her deed, who'd added the conditional clause in the margin. If she could prove the clauses were added fraudulently, if she could prove Kemp wasn't acting as a neutral notary but as Voss's accomplice, then every deed he'd notarized could be challenged. Ruth pulled out onto the road, snow falling heavier now. She needed help, real help, someone who couldn't be intimidated or bought, someone who had as much to lose as she did. She pointed the truck toward town, toward the newspaper office, toward Silas Webb. The county land office smelled like old paper and coal smoke. Ruth pushed through the door just before closing time. 4 o'clock on a Monday. The clerk, a young man named Dennis, 25 maybe, looked up from his desk with the expression of someone who wanted to go home. "We close at 4:30, ma'am." "Then I've got 30 minutes. Ruth walked to the registry counter. "I need access to foreclosure records. 1929 through 1934, Lemhi County." Dennis hesitated. "That's a lot of records." "I'll work fast." He disappeared into the back, returned 10 minutes later with 3 leather-bound ledgers, set them on the counter with a thud that raised dust. "You've got 20 minutes now." Ruth opened the first ledger, 1929 to 1930. Her fingers traced down columns of property descriptions, owner names, foreclosure dates. There. Mackler Homestead, 160 acres, foreclosed March 15, 1930, back taxes $240, sold at auction for $1,000 to Voss Territorial Bank. She turned pages, found the next one. Gray property, 180 acres, foreclosed November 8, 1930, back taxes $280, sold at auction for $1,000 to Voss Territorial Bank, then Patterson, then Morrison, then 2 more she didn't recognize. 6 properties total, all foreclosed between 1930 and 1933, all sold for $1, all purchased by Voss's bank. But it was the notary signatures that made her stop breathing. Every single deed clause, every conditional occupancy requirement, every legal document transferring ownership, signed by the same notary, L. Kemp. Ruth pulled out her own deed, compared the signatures identical. She copied the information into her notebook, property descriptions, dates, amounts, notary stamps. 5 minutes, Dennis called from his desk. Ruth flipped to the mineral rights section, found the original 1929 survey filed by Ezra Talmadge, tungsten deposit identified, concentration 2.3% per ton, estimated value $8.11 notes. Surveyor recommendation, further geological assessment required before county assessment, and stamped across the bottom, assessment pending, no action taken for 5 years. While 6 families lost their farms, Ruth photographed the page with her mind. Every detail, every word. "Time's up, ma'am." She closed the ledgers. "I'll need copies of these foreclosure records, all 6 properties. That'll cost you $2 per property for certified copies." "I'll pay." Dennis looked uncomfortable. "I'll need approval from the county clerk for that many documents. He's gone for the day. Come back tomorrow." "The clerk is Clayton Voss's cousin." "I don't—" Dennis stopped, looked at her more carefully. "You're the woman who bought the Mackler place." "I am. For $1. "That's right." He glanced at the closed door to the clerk's office, then back at Ruth. "My father lost his farm in 32. Patterson property. Bank foreclosed for back taxes. Sold it for $1. His voice was quiet. "He died that winter, froze to death walking home from town, too proud to ask for help." Ruth waited. "I'll make you the copies," Dennis said, "but I can't certify them without the clerk's signature. Best I can do is unofficial duplicates." "You didn't get them from me." "I didn't get them from you." He worked quickly, feeding documents through a copy machine. The smell of developing fluid filled the room. Photographs, technically, not legal copies, but good enough. He handed her the stack. $12. Ruth counted out bills. "Thank you." "Don't thank me." Dennis opened the door for her. "Just make sure whatever you're planning is worth it. Voss has a long memory." "So do I." Outside, dusk was falling. The street lamps hadn't been lit yet. Ruth walked to her truck with the documents tucked inside her coat. 42 days left, And now she had proof. Documentary evidence of a pattern. 6 foreclosures, 1 notary, 1 buyer, 1 tungsten vein worth $11 million. But proof wasn't enough. She needed someone to publish it, someone who couldn't be intimidated. She needed Silas Webb. The mailbox at the end of her driveway was nearly buried in snow. Ruth dug it out, found 1 envelope inside, postmarked Billings, return address, A. Mackler, Ann. Ruth sat in the truck with the engine running, heater blowing cold air that would warm eventually. She held the envelope for a long moment before opening it. The letter was short. Ann's handwriting precise. Legal secretary training showed in every word. Mother, I heard from Nell Drummond that you bought the old homestead. I heard you're in trouble. I know we haven't spoken in 8 years. I know I blamed you for things that weren't your fault. I was wrong. I'm coming to Copper Bend. I'll arrive March 15th. We need to talk. I'm a legal secretary now. I know something about property law and fraud. Maybe I can help. Don't do anything stupid before I get there. And Ruth read it twice, then folded it carefully, tucked it in her coat pocket beside the deed and the psychiatrist's letter. March 15th, that was 3 weeks away, her daughter was coming home. After 8 years of silence. After 8 years of blame and distance, and Ruth learning to live with the fact that she'd lost her husband and her daughter in the same year, Ann was coming home. Ruth started the truck, drove back up the driveway through falling snow. Inside the farmhouse, she pinned Ann's letter to the wall above the table. Beside Ezra's survey maps, beside the copied foreclosure records, evidence was accumulating, allies were emerging. But time was running out. April 28th, 42 days, and Voss had just declared her mentally incompetent in front of the entire town. Ruth made coffee, sat at the table, stared at the wall of documents until the words blurred together. Tomorrow she'd visit Silas Webb, convince him to print the truth, risk his advertising revenue, risk Voss's retaliation. Tomorrow she'd start building a case that could survive a courtroom, or at least survive public opinion. Tonight, she'd allow herself one small mercy. Her daughter was coming home. Ruth stood at the window, watched snow fall across her land, the barn's silhouette dark against white, the tree line where the 5th survey stake waited under frozen ground. 160 acres, bought for $1, worth $11 million underneath. But worth something else too, something harder to measure. This was the land her husband had grown up on, the land his father had homesteaded in 1898, the land that had passed through 3 generations before the bank took it in 1930, the land Ann had played on as a child. Before the crash, before her father walked into the barn and didn't walk out, Ruth had blamed herself for that, for not seeing the signs, for not stopping him. Ann had blamed her too, and for 8 years, Ruth had carried that weight alone, moving from farm to farm, working other people's land, never staying long enough to be known, never putting down roots because roots meant risk, meant caring enough to lose something. But she was done running. This land was hers, conditional or not, and her daughter was coming home. Ruth touched Ann's letter. The paper was thin, fragile, but the words were strong. Maybe I can help. 8 years of silence, broken by 3 words. Maybe she could. Ruth banked the fire, checked the door latch, lay down on the narrow cot. Outside, wind howled, snow piled against the windows. The temperature was dropping towards 0, but inside, the stone walls held firm. The stove ticked as it cooled. And for the first time in 42 days, Ruth felt something that wasn't fear or determination or rate. She felt hope. Small, fragile, easy to break, but real. Real. Her daughter was coming home. And together, maybe they could finish what Ruth had started. Maybe they could prove that truth mattered more than power, that justice was possible even when the law was corrupt, that one woman with 42 days and a brass theodolite could stand against a banker who'd stolen 6 farms and thought he'd gotten away with it. Ruth closed her eyes, slept, and dreamed of spring. The Copper Bend Gazette came out every Thursday. Ruth walked into Silas Webb's print shop on Wednesday afternoon and found him standing over a typeset page, lead letters backwards in their frame. The smell of ink and metal filled the room. He looked up when the bell rang, saw her. His expression flickered. Guilt, maybe, or just exhaustion. Mrs. Mackler. Mr. Webb. Ruth closed the door. I need to talk to you about Clayton Voss. Silas set down his composing stick. I can't help you. You haven't heard what I'm asking. Doesn't matter what you're asking. I can't help. Ruth walked to the typeset page. Read it upside down and backwards. The skill came from watching typesetters work in a dozen towns. The headline, Local Woman's Mental Health Concerns Community. Her stomach dropped. Voss wrote this. Voss provided information. I'm reporting it. Silas wouldn't meet her eyes. It's news, Mrs. Mackler. You made accusations at a church social. You've been digging around in county records. People are worried. People are being told to worry. Same result. Ruth read further. The article cited the psychiatrist's letter, mentioned her paranoid theories about mineral rights fraud, included quotes from concerned citizens, Nell Drummond, Sarah Mitchell, Pastor Whitfield, all expressing hope that Ruth would get the help she needs. Not one word about tungsten deposits, about foreclosure patterns, about 6 families losing out their farms to the same buyer. You're going to print this. It goes to press in 4 hours. Silas finally looked at her. My newspaper survives on advertising, Mrs. Mackler. Voss's bank buys a quarter-page ad every week. Drummond's Mercantile, another quarter-page. The hardware store, the feed supplier. Voss holds their mortgages. They advertise because he tells them to. So you're choosing money over truth. I'm choosing to keep my business alive. His voice was tired. My father lost his newspaper in 31. Went broke fighting a bank that had more lawyers than he had subscribers. I learned from that. You pick battles you can win. And you've decided I can't win. I've decided you're 62 years old, alone, with 40 days left on a conditional deed, going up against a man who controls every source of power in this county. Silas gestured at the typeset page. This article runs tomorrow. By Friday, everyone in Copper Bend will believe you're mentally unstable. By the time your daughter arrives, and yes, I know Anne's coming, news travels, it'll be too late. Voss will have you declared incompetent, the county will take your farm, and you'll have nothing except the satisfaction of being right. Ruth was quiet for a moment. The printing press sat silent in the corner. Massive, iron, built to last generations. Your father, she said. What was his name? What? Your father who lost his newspaper. What was his name? Thomas Webb. And when he died, did you wish he'd fought harder, or did you wish he'd given up sooner? Silas's jaw tightened. Ruth pulled the county records from her coat, set them on the typeset page. 6 farms, 6 conditional deeds, all notarized by Lawrence Kemp, Voss's brother-in-law, all sold for $1 to Voss's bank, all sitting on top of an $11 million tungsten vein that Ezra Talmadge surveyed in 1929. She added Ezra's survey notes, the mineral composition charts, the map showing the vein's path. This is the story, Mr. Webb, not my mental health. This. Silas looked at the documents. His hands didn't move. Where did you get these? County archives. All public record. You could have found them yourself if you'd bothered looking. If I print this, Voss will pull every ad in the paper. I'll be bankrupt by June. If you don't print it, you'll have to explain to your grandchildren why you helped a thief steal 6 farms. The shop was silent, except for the ticking of a wall clock. Smell of ink, smell of metal, smell of choice. Silas picked up one of the foreclosure records, read it carefully. You can prove Kemp's relationship to Voss? Marriage certificates on file at the courthouse. Public record. And you can prove the tungsten deposit exists? Ezra Talmadge will testify, if I can convince him. That's a big if. It's all I've got. Silas set down the document, looked at her, really looked at her. My father used to say something. The press isn't free if it only prints what powerful men allow. Ruth waited. He died broke and bitter, but he died knowing he'd tried. Silas pulled the typeset page from the frame. Lead letters clattered into the tray. I'll need 48 hours to set new type, and I'll need Ezra's testimony on record, signed affidavit. Otherwise, it's just your word against Voss's bank vault full of lawyers. You'll print it? I'll print the truth. Whether that helps you or buries me, I guess we'll find out together. He started pulling letters from the tray, but Mrs. Mackler, if you're wrong about any of this, if even one detail doesn't hold up, Voss will destroy us both. I'm not wrong. Then get me that affidavit. You've got 48 hours. Ruth gathered her documents, turned to leave. Mrs. Mackler. She stopped. My father would have liked you. Silas was already setting new type. He was stubborn, too. Ruth drove straight to Anne's boarding house in Billings. 4 hours through snow. Arrived after dark. Anne opened the door. 36 years old. Her father's eyes, her mother's hands. They stared at each other. You came early, Ruth said. You sounded desperate on the phone. Anne stepped aside. Come in before you freeze. The room was small, neat, a desk covered in legal documents, a bed, a chair, the life of someone who'd learned to live alone, like mother, like daughter. Ruth set her deed on the desk. I need you to look at something. Anne picked it up, studied the signature at the bottom. This is your signature? It's supposed to be. Is it? No. Anne pulled out a magnifying glass, examined the ink, the pen pressure, the letter formation. The loops are wrong. The R in Ruth slants left, yours slants right. I've seen your handwriting on birthday cards. 8 years of birthday cards. Sent. Never answered. Can you prove it's forged? Ruth asked. I'd need comparison samples. Your signature on other documents. Bank records, loan applications, anything official. Ruth pulled out more papers. I brought these. Anne spread them across the desk. Her training showed in the way she worked. Methodical, precise, no wasted motion. After 10 minutes, this isn't even good forgery. Look, the forger pressed too hard trying to match your style, left indentations in the paper, and the ink's wrong. Your other signatures use standard fountain pen ink. This one's heavier, more expensive, the kind a bank president might use. Ruth's breath caught. You can prove that? A handwriting expert could. I'm just a legal secretary. But yes, I'd bet my job this signature isn't yours. Anne looked up. Which means your deed isn't valid, which means you don't legally own that farm. Unless we prove Voss forged it. Unless we prove that. Anne pulled out another document from her own files. And if he forged yours, he probably forged others. I did some research before I came. Found something interesting in property law precedent. She handed Ruth a legal brief. Montana Supreme Court, 1927, case called Henderson v. First National Bank. A banker forged deed signatures to consolidate mining claims in Butte. Court ruled that once forgery is proven on one deed, all deeds notarized by the same party come under suspicion. The entire property consolidation was voided. Ruth stared at the brief. Voss used the same notary for all 6 foreclosures. His brother-in-law, Lawrence Kemp. But if we prove Kemp acted fraudulently on your deed, if we prove he added the conditional clause with forged authorization, then every deed he notarized for Voss could be challenged. Anne's voice was steady, professional, but her hands were shaking slightly. Mother, if you're right about this, if there really is an $11 million tungsten deposit, Voss didn't just steal 6 farms. He built an entire mineral empire on forged documents. And it all collapses if we expose one forgery. It all collapses. Anne set down the magnifying glass. But we need absolute proof. Signed affidavits, expert testimony, documentary evidence. We need everything to be airtight because Voss will have lawyers. Lots of them. I have Ezra Talmadge, the original surveyor. He can testify about the tungsten vein. Will he? I'll make him. Anne looked at Ruth. 8 years of distance, 8 years of blame, 8 years of silence. Why didn't you stop him? Anne's voice was quiet. Dad, why didn't you stop him from going into that barn? Ruth sat down. The chair creaked. I tried. I begged him to wait, to give it time, to believe things would get better. She looked at her hands. 62 years of work, written in the calluses. But your father had lost everything he'd built. The bank took our farm, took his pride, took his future. And I couldn't give him a reason to stay. So you blamed yourself. Someone had to. And I blamed you, too. Anne's eyes were wet. I was so angry. At you, at him, at God, at everyone except the bank that actually took everything from us. Clayton Voss's bank. I know. Anne wiped her eyes. I looked it up. First National Bank of Copper Bend, owned by Voss Territorial Banking Corporation. Your husband's farm was foreclosed in 1929 for $240 in back taxes. The same amount Voss is demanding from me now. The same amount. They sat in silence. The room was cold. Ruth could hear snow against the window. I should have come sooner, Anne said. When you first bought that farm. Should have helped instead of staying angry. You're here now. I'm here now. Anne gathered the documents. And we're going to destroy Clayton Voss. For Dad, for the 6 families he stole from, for every person in Copper Bend who's too afraid to fight back. Ruth stood. I need to get back. Convince Ezra to testify. Get his signed affidavit to Silas Webb by Friday. I'll follow you tomorrow. Bring my research. Bring every piece of legal precedent I can find. Anne walked Ruth to the door, stopped. Mother? Ruth turned. I'm sorry for 8 years of silence, for blaming you, for not seeing that you were grieving too." Ruth pulled her daughter into an embrace. First time in 8 years, Anne smelled like soap and paper and something else, something like home. "We'll get through this," Ruth said. Together. Together. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was clearing, stars beginning to show. Ruth drove back toward Copper Bend with documents on the seat beside her. Proof of forgery, proof of conspiracy, proof that Clayton Voss's empire was built on lies. 40 days left, but now she wasn't alone. Ruth found Ezra at the Copper Bend Saloon at noon on a Thursday. He sat alone at the corner table, whiskey glass half empty, staring at nothing. She sat down across from him without asking. "I need you to testify." Ezra didn't look up. "No. Silas Webb is printing the story. He needs your signed affidavit by tomorrow morning. Survey notes, mineral assessments, everything you found in 1929. I said no. Ruth pulled out the foreclosure records, set them on the table between the whiskey glass and Ezra's trembling hands. 6 families, Ezra. 6 farms, stolen because you stayed quiet. I know what I did. Then fix it. Can't fix the past." He drank. "Can't bring back the dead. No, but you can stop Voss from stealing a 7th farm. You can testify that he knew about the tungsten before the foreclosures, that he stole your theodolite to hide the evidence, that every conditional deed was part of a planned consolidation." Ezra finally looked at her. His eyes were red. "You think one old drunk's testimony will stop Clayton Voss? He's got lawyers, judges, the whole county in his pocket. He's got fear. That's all he's ever had. And fear only works if we let it." Easy words for someone who hasn't lost everything yet. The saloon door opened. Nell Drummond walked in, saw them, crossed straight to their table. Her face was pale, eyes swollen from crying. "Mrs. Mackler, Mr. Talmadge." Her voice shook. "I need to tell you something." Ruth waited. "Voss foreclosed on my store this morning, said I'm 3 months behind on mortgage payments. I've got receipts proving every payment, but he says his records show different. Says I owe $1,200 by Monday, or he takes the mercantile." Ezra looked up. "Jesus, Nell." "I went to the sheriff, showed him my receipts. He said it's a civil matter between me and the bank, said I should get a lawyer." Nell laughed, bitter. "Every lawyer in this county owes Voss money or works for him." Ruth's jaw tightened. "He's punishing you for talking to me." "I know what he's doing, and I can't stop him." Nell pulled out a chair, sat heavily. "But I can testify about the credit denial, about him ordering me to report on your activities, about the pressure he puts on every business owner in this town." She looked at Ezra. "You surveyed my father's property in 1930, Patterson Place. You found tungsten there too, didn't you?" Ezra's hands were shaking harder now. "I did. My father died that winter, froze to death walking home drunk, too ashamed to ask for help after losing his farm." Nell's voice was steady now, hard. "I blamed him for being weak, for giving up, but he didn't give up. He was pushed. By Voss. By this whole goddamn town pretending not to see what was happening." She stood. "I'll testify. I'll lose my store. Probably lose my house too, but I'll testify." Ezra stared at his whiskey glass. The amber liquid caught lamplight. "I watched 6 families fall," he said quietly. "Told myself I was protecting my own. Told myself silence was survival." He looked at Nell, at Ruth. "But silence is just another word for complicity." He pushed the glass away. "I'll testify." Ruth felt something loosen in her chest. "Tomorrow morning, Silas Webb's print shop. Bring your survey notes." "I'll bring everything," Ezra stood. "And Mrs. Mackler, I'm sorry. For all of it. Don't apologize to me. Apologize by telling the truth." Outside, the March wind carried the smell of thaw, ice melting, ground softening, spring was coming, and with it, a reckoning. April 28th came clear and cold. 200 people filled the county courthouse steps, more than had gathered since the 4th of July parade in '32. Ruth stood in the back of the crowd, Anne beside her, Ezra on her other side, sober for the first time in years, holding a leather folder thick with documents. Nell Drummond stood near the front. Her store was boarded up now, foreclosed 3 days ago, but she'd worn her Sunday dress and held her head high. Silas Webb stood at the edge with his camera. The Gazette had printed its exposé that morning. Every household in Copper Bend had received a copy. Banker's mineral scheme exposed. 6 farms, 1 fraud, $11 million. Clayton Voss stood at the podium beside the county clerk. His suit was perfect, his expression calm, but Ruth saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. The clerk raised his gavel. First item, Mackler Homestead, 160 acres, back taxes due, $240. Mrs. Ruth Mackler has failed to remit payment. Property reverts to county ownership for immediate auction. I object. Ruth's voice carried across the steps. The crowd turned. Mrs. Mackler. The clerk looked uncomfortable. This is a legal proceeding. You can't simply... I object on grounds of fraudulent deed execution. Ruth pushed through the crowd. Ann and Ezra followed. My deed signature was forged. The conditional clause was added without authorization, and the notary who executed the forgery, Lawrence Kemp, is Clayton Voss's brother-in-law. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Voss stepped forward. This is a desperate woman making desperate accusations. Mrs. Mackler's mental instability has been well documented. By your brother-in-law, the psychiatrist. Ruth reached the podium, set down 2 deeds side by side. This is my deed. This is the deed from the Gray foreclosure in 1930, both notarized by L. Kemp, both with conditional clauses added in identical handwriting. She pulled out Ann's handwriting analysis. My daughter is a legal secretary. She's compared these signatures to my verified documents. The deed signature is forged. The pen pressure is wrong. The ink composition is wrong. Even the slant is wrong. Ann stepped forward. I've also researched Montana property law precedent, Henderson v. First National Bank, 1927. When forgery is proven on one deed, all deeds notarized by the same party come under legal suspicion. The crowd was silent now. Even the children had stopped moving. Ezra opened his leather folder, pulled out survey maps from 1929. I'm Ezra Talmadge, county surveyor for 30 years until Clayton Voss stole my theodolite to hide what I'd found. He spread the maps on the podium. His hands were steady. Tungsten deposit, running through 6 properties, worth $11 million in 1929, worth more now with the war building in Europe. I surveyed it, filed my report. 3 days later, Voss borrowed my equipment for verification, never returned it. I kept silent because he threatened my surveyor's license, threatened my family. He looked at Voss. I was a coward then. I'm not a coward now. Nell Drummond pushed forward. I'll testify too. Voss ordered me to deny Mrs. Mackler credit, ordered me to report on her activities. When I started asking questions, he foreclosed on my store using fraudulent mortgage records. Sheriff Tom Bradley stepped onto the courthouse steps. Mr. Voss, I'm going to need you to come to my office. We need to discuss some irregularities in county records. Voss's composure finally cracked. This is a conspiracy. These people have documentation, the sheriff interrupted. Survey records, handwriting analysis, foreclosure patterns spanning 5 years. That Gazette article this morning included photocopies of county documents that raised serious questions. He looked at the crowd. Questions I should have asked years ago. The county clerk set down his gavel. In light of these allegations, I'm suspending the tax sale pending investigation. Ruth held up her worn deed. The paper was creased from 4 months in her coat pocket, stained with weather and work. This deed survived a Montana winter. It survived isolation and intimidation and every trap Clayton Voss could set. She held up the pristine deed from county records. This one survived in a bank vault, perfect and untouched. Now you tell me, which one got lived and which one got forged? The crowd erupted. Voss turned and walked down the courthouse steps. His lawyer followed, already making phone calls. The bank board would force his resignation by evening. The state attorney general would open an investigation by week's end. And 6 families, or what remained of them, would finally get justice. Ruth folded her worn deed carefully, put it back in her coat pocket where it belonged. The county courthouse cleared slowly, people lingering on the steps talking in clusters, voices careful at first, then growing bolder as Voss's black sedan disappeared down Main Street. Sheriff Bradley approached Ruth. Mrs. Mackler, I need your statement and Mr. Talmadge's survey documentation. We're opening a formal investigation into property fraud, mineral rights violations, and forgery. You'll have everything. Ruth's voice was tired. How long will it take? Months, probably, maybe longer. Voss will lawyer up, fight every charge. But with the evidence you've gathered, he paused. We'll get him, and we'll void those foreclosures. Ezra stood nearby, still holding his leather folder. What about the families who lost their farms? The ones who died thinking they'd failed? We can't bring them back. Bradley's expression was grim. But we can return the land to their heirs, make financial restitution from Voss's assets. It's not justice, but it's something. Nell Drummond joined them. What about the mineral rights? That tungsten deposit? County will likely form a cooperative, Bradley said. Split ownership among the original 6 families, or their descendants. Fair market value for extraction rights. Could be $2 million per family once it's all settled. Ruth did the math. $2 million, more money than she'd see in 10 lifetimes of farm work. But it wasn't why she'd fought. Anne touched her mother's arm. Come on, let's go home. Home. Ruth let the words settle. They drove back to the Mackler homestead in silence. The spring afternoon was warm enough that Ruth rolled down the truck window. Smell of wet earth, of things thawing, of winter finally breaking. At the farmhouse, Anne helped carry Ezra's documents inside. They spread everything on the table. Survey maps, foreclosure records, handwriting analyses, mineral assessments, the evidence that had saved them. What now? Anne asked. Ruth looked around the small room, the wood stove, the narrow cot, the stone walls that had held firm through 4 months of winter. Now we rebuild. She walked to the window. The collapsed barn needed demolition. The well pump needed replacing. The porch sagged dangerously. Going to take years to make this place livable. Good thing you're not going anywhere. Ruth turned. Anne was smiling, actually smiling. I took a job in Copper Bend, Anne said. Legal secretary position with a firm in town. They're handling the Voss investigation. Thought you might want family nearby. Ruth's throat tightened. You're staying? I'm staying. Anne crossed to her mother. 8 years I wasted being angry, being alone. I'm done with that. They embraced. Ruth closed her eyes, felt something that had been broken start to mend. Outside, Ezra's truck pulled up. He climbed out carrying his theodolite, the brass instrument that had started everything. Ruth met him at the door. Thought this should go where it belongs, Ezra said. As a reminder. Of what? That truth doesn't stay buried forever. Someone always digs it up. He handed her the theodolite. And that cowards can still choose courage, eventually. Ruth took the instrument. The brass was cold. The bell rang softly. You saved 6 families today, Ezra. We saved them. You, me, Nell, Silas, Anne, took all of us. He looked at the collapsed barn. Need help rebuilding? I could use a surveyor, make sure the new barn's level. Ezra almost smiled. I'll bring my equipment. May arrived with rain that turned the roads to mud and the fields to green. Ruth and Anne planted a garden together, tomatoes, beans, potatoes, things that would grow. The theodolite hung on the farmhouse wall now, next to Ruth's worn deed framed behind glass. The paper was creased, stained, barely legible in places, but it had survived. Anne hammered the last fence post into softening ground. Nell's bringing dinner tonight. Said she's testing recipes for her new restaurant. New restaurant? She's using her restitution money to buy the old hotel building, converting it. Says Copper Bend needs a place where people can speak freely without worrying who's listening. Ruth smiled. Nell Drummond, restaurant owner. Ezra Talmadge, sober and surveying again. Silas Webb's newspaper thriving now that he'd proven he couldn't be bought. A whole town learning to stand upright after years of bowing. The sound of a truck coming up the driveway. Ruth shaded her eyes, recognized the vehicle. Silas Webb, camera around his neck. Mrs. Mackler, he climbed out, grinning. State attorney just announced formal charges against Voss. 12 counts of fraud, 6 counts of forgery, multiple counts of conspiracy. He's looking at 20 years. Good. That's it? Just good? Silas raised his camera. You took down the most powerful man in the county, changed Montana property law, exposed a 5-year conspiracy. Give me something quotable. Ruth looked at her land. At the barn foundation Ezra had surveyed that morning. At the garden she and Anne had planted. At the mountains rising beyond, still capped with snow but showing green at their base. Tell them this, she said. Some ground is worth defending, not because it's easy, not because it's profitable, but because it's yours. And nobody, not bankers, not lawyers, not fear itself, has the right to take it. Silas snapped the photo. Perfect. That night, Ruth sat on her porch with coffee in her hands. Anne was inside, cooking. Nell would arrive soon. Ezra had promised to bring his fiddle. The deed hung on the wall behind her, the theodolite beside it. 2 symbols of the same truth, that what's buried always finds light, that lies collapse under their own weight. That one stubborn woman with nothing left to lose could stand against power and win, not because she was brave, but because she refused to be anything else. Spring had come. The dust had settled, and Ruth Mackler was finally home. The sun rose over the eastern ridge, painting snow on distant peaks the color of rose gold. Ruth sat on her porch with coffee steaming in the cold morning air. May had brought warmth to the valleys, but the high country still held winter in its bones. Behind her, through the open door, she heard Anne moving in the kitchen. The smell of frying bacon, the sound of a daughter who'd come home and decided to stay. 40 years, Ruth had worked other people's land, moved when the seasons changed, never put down roots because roots meant risk, meant caring enough that losing something could break you. But breaking, she'd learned, wasn't the worst thing that could happen to a person. Staying broken was. The theodolite caught morning light through the window, brass gleaming next to her worn deed, two pieces of evidence that had brought down a man who thought power made him untouchable. Ezra's truck appeared at the bottom of the drive, coming to survey the new barn foundation, coming because he'd finally learned that redemption wasn't granted. It was earned through the slow work of making things right. A magpie called from the tree line, the same call she'd heard that first day in January when she'd stood in front of a collapsed barn and a broken house and decided they were worth saving. The deed had cost her $1. The fight had cost her everything she'd been before. But sitting here now, coffee warm in her hands, daughter singing off-key in the kitchen, spring softening the frozen ground, Ruth understood something her grandfather had tried to teach her 40 years ago. Land doesn't make you whole, fighting for it does. She sipped her coffee, watched the sun climb, listened to the sounds of a place that was finally, completely hers. By God's mercy, the dust had settled. And truth, once spoken, doesn't unspeak itself. It just waits for the next person brave enough or stubborn enough to say it out loud.